Let's talk a little bit about experiences of ritualized surrender, right? Psychologists often tell us that it is in the act of letting go that you find out who you are. The prospect of ego death, however, the prospect of any kind of ritualized surrender feels like dying, but only to those who resist it. Those who eventually come to realize that there is no such thing as death, at least that psychological dying into the moment is but an illusion, the last hurrah, the last resistance before you hurl yourself into the abyss and realize that it's a featherbed. You know, Terence McKenna talked about this. He said, this is the secret. This is what all the shamans, the professors, the wise men, this is what they understood. This is the alchemical goal. This is how magic is done. You hurl yourself into the abyss and you realize that it's a featherbed. Our society today is constructed, we know this, in a way where many people are afflicted with a pathological amount of anxiety and depression. It's what Jamie Wheel calls 21st century normal, this fibrillating, anxious state from an overactive ego stemming from a misfiring default mode network, which is the autobiographical mind, which is essentially metastasized into something that is a kind of autoimmune disorder of the self, and the excessive rumination and self-consciousness that characterizes depression and anxiety both come from a mind that has become too ordered, too rigid, too hyper-vigilant. It's like we're all living with a perpetual micro-PTSD. And what the research tells us, and this has informed so much of my creative life, what the research now tells us is that in safe containers and with the proper precautions deployed, the experience of ecstatic surrender, the experience of ego death, what Jamie Wheel calls the bliss fuck crucifixion, is actually where all the healing is done, right? It is when you die into the moment that you realize that all your fears are unfounded. You come to see that everything you want is on the other side of fear, right? It's like that David Fincher movie, The Game, reveals to us in that line that says, quoting the Bible, John chapter 12, verse something, whereas once I was blind, now I can see. It is hard to put language to these instances of ecstatic surrender, right? Hurling yourself into the abyss and realizing that it's a featherbed arrives you at a domain that exists outside of time. The self experiences this as liberation from the incessant inner chatter. We are free to be ourselves. We become infinite is what it feels like. Transitory, enchanted moments in which we hold our breath, compelled into aesthetic contemplations we neither understand nor perhaps even desired, face to face with something commensurate to our capacity for wonder. We experience afresh the hardly bearable ecstasy of direct energy exploding in our nerve endings. We recontextualize the self as a marvelous conduit in a timeless whole from which molecules and meanings flow from neurons to nebula and back again. We see the world in a grain of sand, and we see heaven in a wild flower. We hold infinity in the palms of our hand. We hold eternity in an hour. And then the moment will pass. And all contradictions are reconciled. Man has surpassed the gods. And what do we find after these enchanted moments? What do we find after these moments of opiated adjacency? When we spill over, when we overflow, when we are cracked open so that the light gets in. We find that people report increased feelings of well-being in their baseline reality, increased feelings of compassion, increased feelings of creativity, increased feelings of joy, a sense of having glimpsed noetic truth, a sense of having tapped into the infinite, a feeling of communion with the cosmos. An ontological awakening, a spiritual experience, a forceful reckoning with what is, a mainlining of space and time through the optic nerve. We become what we behold, and we behold tragic sense of life. Eternity, eternity, nothing is real that is not eternal. So the question remains, right? We know the way, we know the path, we know what we must do to heal ourselves. How might we turn our passing illuminations into abiding light? How might we turn our self-systems from leaky buckets, right, colanders full of holes, into chalices, said Jamie Wheel. How might we render ourselves whole? How might we render ourselves holy? This has become the central preoccupation of my life.